Okay, I see us all here. Staff is ready. So why don't we reconvene with a special guest from the Salazar home. Why don't we go ahead and reconvene the San Bruno City Council meeting? And we are now on item 6, study session. I'll just go ahead and read it. Study session, item A, study session on CityNet's fiber to the home project funding options. We'll turn it over to the city manager.
As we share the screen. Okay, I think we're good. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, or I should probably say good night. Regardless of the hour, we are here excited to present to you the Fiber to the Home presentation. We will talk both about the project as well as about revenue and financing options for the project. The presentation tonight will be by 3 individuals, myself, Javon Grogan, City Manager, immediately to my right, Sandeep Krishnamurthy, our CityNet Services Director, and then to his right, Keith DeMartini, our Finance Director. The objective for tonight's presentation is to provide the City Council and the public with an update on the CityNet Services Enterprise and the Fiber to the Home project. We will also present revenue generating and financing options for that project. And we would like council to provide guidance to staff on those revenue generating and or financing options. We're not asking for a final decision tonight, that is important to note, but council, after hearing the presentation, may have questions and may want to provide guidance to point staff in a particular direction or ask for additional information. So our agenda tonight is as follows. 4 items. We will talk about the CityNet Enterprise and the project, as well as our business plan. We will then go over, and our Finance Director will pick it up then to go over revenue options and our financing options, and then discussion next steps and questions. And so CityNet Enterprise Business Plan, there are really 3 distinct parts. So I went over the agenda, but I want to go over sort of 3 distinct parts to our presentation tonight. Part 1 will be some opening remarks from me. Part 2 will be a recap provided by our CityNet Director, and then he will then go into Part 3, which is the business plan, and then Part 3 will be joined by the Finance Director for financial items related to the Fiber to the Home project. So why don't I begin with some opening remarks. So why is the city in the ISP or cable TV business? And so we launched that business as a community. I wasn't here. Some of us in this room weren't here, and some of you, council, well, most of you guys were actually probably here. But we launched this business in 1971 as a community, as an enterprise to provide cable TV. And like many jurisdictions across the country, we entered into the cable TV business. We are still in this business. We are a local, customer-friendly business. One of the questions that we're often asked is, would the city enter this business today? It is a line of business and enterprise that is, at this point, atypical of municipal corporations. And so the question is a valid question. If we weren't in the business and if we did not have such a long trajectory of being in the business, would we enter it today? The answer is actually, for pay TV, probably not. The pay TV enterprise has made significant shifts that we'll talk about, but it's probably a business that if we were beginning from ground zero, we would not enter into. Broadband internet is a different story, and the answer is perhaps yes. There are a number of municipalities that are not providing broadband internet that would like to provide broadband internet, and increasingly, internet is becoming a utility that is almost looked at as not a fee utility, but almost a right, as a right. And so cities are getting into the broadband internet business. And so the scope of today's study session is not to talk about everything regarding our CityNet Services Enterprise, but really we want to laser in on the fiber to the home upgrade plan, as well as financing operations. And council will remember from our prior presentations and conversations that the fiber to the home project is really the linchpin of the business plan that underpins the entire enterprise. and really what will drive the success and frankly the future of this enterprise. And so another question is sort of, why should we stay in business? Well, our goal is to provide the public with quality entertainment and internet services, but also provide an ROI, a return on investment to the city's general fund. And we'll see in a few slides that we've made significant progress towards having a positive annual ROI. I talked a little bit about internet being a utility and the expectation that it really should be publicly available, and being in the business allows us to further that. It also allows us to bridge the digital divide that is becoming ever more prevalent in American society, and cities are looking to provide internet service. And one of the things that we were able to do, really pivot on a dime with COVID-19, is we were able to tilt up a program to provide free internet service to kids that needed it for distance learning. So an important aspect of being in the business that ordinarily we would not have been able to do. We're also able to provide citizens of San Bruno with reasonably priced internet, and I would add cable TV service. We are not in the business to make a profit. We are in the business to provide quality services, provide an ROI to the general fund, but we do not have a profit motive, which is an important point when we look at some of the plans that are offered by some of the larger telecom entities out there. You know, one of the last points on this slide is that our CityNet subscribers have not been monetized. And so unlike the private providers, we don't sell their data. We have not, we never will. And that is not something that we look to generate additional revenue for the shareholders, which are the citizens of San Bruno. And so what is really required in order for us to stay in this business? Well, in order to continue and win, we need to make investments in our infrastructure. We'll talk a little bit about the investments that have been made over the last 46 years of the enterprise. But we really are at this point where if we're going to stay in the business, really have to make a significant investment in fiber and bringing fiber to the entire footprint of the homes that we serve. And we'll talk a little bit about the existing fiber to the home projects that we have in a minute. So council may remember that we did a router upgrade project recently, 2 years ago is when that started, and it finished approximately a year ago. And it increased internet connectivity. We didn't know this, but we're really glad we did that because frankly, we did it before COVID-19. And that's what has allowed us to have increased internet capacity and bandwidth. And so as more people are home, and Sandeep will talk in more detail about this, but the increasing demands and spiking internet usage has actually boded very well for the enterprise. We've been able to handle that additional traffic without service outages because of that router upgrade. And that's a prime example of how investment in infrastructure, even before it becomes a critical need, is important because you don't always know what's next up. Multi-unit dwellings. We have upgraded a number of our multi-unit complexes. And so right now, it enables 68% of the 2,500 upgraded condos to have access to 1 gigabit internet. And so when we talk about the fiber to the home project, we actually have fiber to the home in a number of multi-unit buildings. And what you'll hear in this presentation is that has already had a positive ROI. That project cost just over $2 million and was completed in 2016 and has already paid for itself, and is bringing the enterprise over $800,000 in net additional revenue. And so we know fiber to the home works. We know that the investments that we've already made have paid for themselves and are providing additional dividends to the enterprise. And so the next logical step, as we all know, is to upgrade single-family homes. Another question is, what have we done over the last 24 months? And so Sandeep has been our director for the last 24 months. And so one of the things that I would like to highlight that was accomplished was we reduced significant cost through negotiations of a number of the contracts with our service providers. And that's not just people that provide equipment and service, that's also vendors that provide the pay TV that we then turn around and sell to customers. And so through the work of Sandeep and the department, Sandeep, I've congratulated you on this a lot of times, both publicly and privately, but once again, your amazing work to renegotiate contracts with our vendors and the telecom providers has amounted to, frankly, remarkable progress in reducing and projected to eliminate the annual deficit. We increased internet capacity through that router project. We introduced a new rate card in 2018, 2019, which actually has higher gross margins. So for every home that transitions to the new rate card, the enterprise actually makes more money, which is important because we've had an annual deficit. And so moving people from the old rate card to the new rate card has been an important marketing strategy. And there's significant success on that will be talked about. We've also moved a number of operating or capital costs from what in the industry is called from CapEx to OpEx. Basically, because we have not had the bank account to make the capital investments, we've moved some capital expenditures to the operating budget and funding them over time. Now, part of that is a bridge strategy to bridge us till we get to the fiber to the home project. And part of it is because we have not had the money in the bank to make those capital investments. But what the totality of all of these changes over the last 24 months has allowed the division to move to, and the results are right there on the screen, from fiscal year 17-18 with an operational deficit of over 1.2 million, in the next year to drop that to 872,000, and just this last year that ended in June 2020 to drop that to $270,000. And the current budget that we're operating under projects a completely balanced budget. And so, as we've said before, what do you do when you find yourself in a hole? You stop digging, and we've done that, and we've turned the tide. And now, what we're talking to you about tonight is really pivoting for full success and hopefully identifying a path to implement the fiber to the home project. And so, the presentation that is before you is really, for the remaining portions of the presentation, is broken down into two parts. The CityNet operations, subscriber and data trends, CX, customer experience, and then part three, really drilling down into the enterprise strategy and the fiber upgrade plan. So I will be quiet now and turn it over to people that know way more than I do about this. Let's start with Sandeep for part two.
Please, Director.
Thank you. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the Council. My name is Sandeep Krishnamurthy. I'm the Director of CityNet Services, and I will be taking on the presentation from this point. Thank you, City Manager, for those kind remarks. Moving on, system data. CityNet started life as a CATV system, basically a big antenna up on the hillside that pulled down signals from the few off-air stations that were available in the market at the time, and piped through to the homes that were on a very limited network. From there, the system evolved from its launch in 1971 through the years to the cable system that we know today. As a cable TV system, San Bruno CityNet comprises a 750 megahertz back-end system, and it serves about 45% of the homes in San Bruno as of today through 89 miles of cable laid on the streets. It owns and operates Channel 1, which, as we know, is the public, educational, and governmental channel. The system covers, through its cable, 100% of the homes passed in San Bruno. The head end is old. It was built in 1998, which makes it 22 years old. The hybrid fiber coax cable that we have on the streets is 45 years old. We launched our internet service provider business in 2002. And we currently carry 368 television channels, of which 105 are in high definition, and we also offer about 4,000 hours of cable video on demand. On the internet side, which, as I just said, we launched the business in 2002, we cover the entire system, all the homes that we pass, with an offering up to 300 megabits per second. And thanks to the router upgrade that we completed in November of 2018, this 300 megabits has become possible. In 17% of the homes that we currently cover with fiber, we can offer speeds up to 1 gigabit, which is the market standard at this time. The next slide here gives us a history of all the capital investments made into San Bruno CityNet from 1971 onwards. The total amount spent, you'll see at the bottom of the slide, which is at a total of 18.065 million over the past 47 years, of which the last two, color-coded in a different color than white, they refer to the most recent projects completed, which include the router upgrade project, which cost the city a total of 1.6 million, and then $2.2 million spent on the fiber install in the MDUs in Shelter Creek, Peninsula Place, and Crystal Springs. We shall talk more about this further on in the presentation. City Manager Grogan referred to moving several items from CapEx to OpEx. That's been a large part of our operational strategy in the last 2 years. Some of the activities that we've done so far include moving the headend to a remote location. We've been operating a 750 megahertz headend, which I just said was pretty old and went 22 years to be precise, from our location in 140 Arbor Court to a remote location operated by the manufacturer of the equipment, a company called Aris in San Diego. And essentially, we are operating in their cloud, in their data center environment, and running our headend from there. The reason for this is if we hadn't done that, we would have had to purchase the equipment to replace the headend because it was end of support and end of life. And that would have cost us to start with $250,000 with additional equipment required over and above that. By making this move to an operational expense, what we have done is brought it down to a monthly fee that we pay on a per subscriber box basis to Aris, which is again preparatory to further move towards IPTV, because the ecosystem around the cable headend and the set-top boxes that reside in customers' homes are very dated and need to be replaced. We have eliminated bulk inventory acquisitions by replacing them with just-in-time replacements, which again saves on capital. We have a number of ongoing and upcoming moves from CapEx to OpEx, which include disaster recovery implementation, the tap and node replacements. These are the pieces of equipment that sit on the streets and are fed through electricity and frequently go bad as time moves on. We are also building out a cybersecurity strategy, and we have a range of small-scale fiber rollouts planned for small neighborhoods around the city. We also have a plan to move the call manager, which helps us to manage telephone calls and the phone part of our business, from an on-premise piece of equipment, which again costs about $250,000. We would like to move this to the cloud, and we have this in our plans. Here's a quick rundown of the changes we made in 2018-19. We launched market-leading packages. What this means is really we led with the internet first, added elements of television to it, and realigned the enterprise's offerings in the marketplace. We updated our TV guide on the set-top boxes, which we completed in April 2019. We added foreign language networks such as Chinese, Filipino, and Korean in the basic programming tier. We started offering a phone line for $7.50 a month, which still remains the price and is one of the lowest in the nation. We implemented a new rate card with the internet first packages on the 1st of February 2019. As of this month, about 32 to 33% of our subscriber base is on this new rate card. And as City Manager Grogan mentioned, this rate card enables the attainment of a higher margin to the enterprise and therefore puts us in a slightly better financial shape. Performance improvements, we've increased internet capacity, speeds, and reliability. We changed our logo and mission and shifted to San Bruno CityNet from San Bruno Municipal Cable TV in November of 2019. We have put in place several cost controls, which have enabled a 30% savings on card processing charges, reduced our wholesale phone rates by 59%, reduced our network monitoring by 52%, and we continue working on additional savings as we renegotiate plans. We have developed an upgrade plan for high definition for Channel 1, and this was all done in the 2018-19 fiscal year. In the current or the recently concluded 2019-20 fiscal year and coming soon in 2021, we have, of course, the free internet offer, which thanks to the council and the support of various organizations, we were able to introduce in April of 2020. We have a new whole home Wi-Fi product ready to launch. We have just completed ordering it and should be ready to go sometime in November. What this product is really a Wi-Fi enabled home that is monitored through the cloud and will allow us to offer a service to our viewers, especially as they continue to work from home. The move of the head into a remote location now has gained momentum to the point where the system is ready, technologically speaking, to begin moving towards the launch of Internet Protocol television. This would be very big in terms of our overall strategy because it would realign us towards a new look and feel in terms of our television product line. We have been successful in negotiating reduced pricing for a wholesale internet connectivity yet again from what we did last year, and we're looking at an additional 33% of savings in this area. During the COVID lockdowns, which began in mid-March, the enterprise has been fully functional. We have performed, I think, rather well with over 100% surge in internet usage and over 50% increase in television viewership during this time. Coming soon, we have a range of internet and Wi-Fi packages, which will launch at about the same time as we launch the whole home Wi-Fi product. We have a range of improved protocols in place for cybersecurity. And as for Channel One, the viewership has gone up very significantly during the COVID lockdown period. As of January of 2020, viewership on Channel One was a collective 6,000 minutes for the entire month. In the month of August, it was 175,000 minutes. So it's a 2,900% increase in viewership. As I mentioned earlier, we have several small fiber builds identified throughout the city and plan on doing that in the context of our operational expenses through the year, based, of course, on our being able to afford it in terms of the revenue coming in. Beyond all this, we have been working on upgrading or building our upgrade plan for the entire system for the last 2 years, and it's ready to go based on direction from the council. The small fiber rollouts we have identified include the Spyglass Road neighborhood, which has about 70 homes served by underground conduit. We have been very fortunate in being able to acquire the replaced water pipe system in the Florida Park neighborhood. The city's public works department, thanks to city managers' intervention and to the public works director, were kind enough to hand it over to CityNet for use in repurposing these pipes for the fiber build out as and when that becomes feasible. We have identified underground conduit in the Mirasol community and are currently studying the feasibility of launching that build. We have fiber plants in development for all the new developments in San Bruno, the first of which is the D.R. Horton development near Skyline College. It's already completed. The model homes are in operation with our system. We have submitted plans for the Mills Park development, as we have for the Bay Hill development, including the realignment of Grundy. And we are relaying fiber in that area. We have plans in place for the SP rack facility, which is in its planning stages, as we have for 500 Sylvan Avenue. A couple of new business development opportunities have also been identified in the fiber build-out space. The first of which is the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. This is a reverse auction operated by the Federal Communications Commission. And what it is the identification of census blocks that are considered underserved by internet throughout the whole country, of which, surprisingly enough, there's a couple or a few of them in San Bruno itself and a few in surrounding communities. Our intention is to bid in this reverse auction by providing the lowest feasible offer and if we were the winning bidder in this auction, given all the bidders submitting bids for this area, we would be in a position to collect on revenue for these census blocks for a duration of 10 years. The next piece is a link to the SAMCAT, or the San Mateo County Fiber Media. It's the San Mateo County Media Authority, which is what SAMCAT stands for. And we have had some initial discussions towards positioning CityNet as the ISP to cities that are connected to this fiber link. And the discussions are still very preliminary, but what it involves is to link CityNet or our internet services to the fiber link that runs on El Camino Real and connects 8 cities in the county. Going into 10-year subscriber trends, this graph shows the overall picture since July of 2010 going through July of 2020. On the internet business, which is the orange colored line in the graph, you see a growth from slightly over 2,000 subscribers in 2010 going to over 6,000 in 2020. On the TV side, the remaining two lines, the brown or the reddish line and the blue line, these two move in conjunction because they both refer to parts of this overall TV package that we offer. The red line being basic TV and the blue line being expanded basic. And these have moved in consonance from a little over 4,000 subscribers to just over a little over 4,000 in 2020, with its peak being in 2015. In numerical form, the same information presented on the previous graph is out here. In the internet, in the internet business, we had 2,506 subscribers in July of 2010, rising to 6,224 as of September of this year. In basic TV, we had 4,298. We are at 4,510. But as I pointed out in the graph, our peak was somewhere in the July 2014 through July 2016, where we had between 5,400 and 5,300 subscribers. Expanded basic, likewise, in July 2010, we were at 3,802. And as of this month, we are at 3,883, pretty much where we were 10 years ago. In terms of telephone, it's a small business. There has been some growth. We were at 408 subscribers 10 years ago. We are at a little over 1,000 now. On this slide, we have a comparison of the internet revenues and direct expenses. I'd like to emphasize that these expenses are the expenses we have incurred directly connected to offering internet service. There are always a range of ancillary expenses that go into running a business, and those are not reflected on this slide. So what we see here is in 2010, we had an expense of $770,000 for the year to actually acquire wholesale internet connectivity from our providers, but we generated revenue of about $2.3 million. In 10 years down the road, in 2019-20, we had expenses that were slightly lower, $687,000, but we generated income that was almost double what we did in 2010, which is we went up to almost a little under $4 million. This slide has an entirely different picture. It presents the expense for TV over the same 10-year period. In 2009 and 10, we spent $4.015 million to generate $5.6 million in revenue. In 2019 and 20, that picture has flipped. We have spent 4.068, about the same as in 2010, but we have generated only 3.2 million. I had referred to this picture in the graph where I had mentioned for TV, our peak was in 13, 14, 15, 16. And if you look at the expense and revenue generation number, you'll see the beginning of the slide. In 2013 and 14, we spent 4.032 million. We generated 4.201, slightly over what we spent. The same number starts sliding in 2015 and 16, where we spent 4.5 million to generate 3.7 million. The broadest conclusion from these two slides, from the internet and the television revenue and direct expense slides, is that internet's obviously the most profitable part of the business. This is the same information from the previous two slides in graphical form. There's a point of intersection between the TV revenue and the TV expense slide, and that's where the decline or the deficit begins for the enterprise as a whole as well. So the key conclusions from all this data is that the internet is more profitable for the enterprise, but TV is required to retain subscribers because most people continue to have TV and internet as part of the same bundle. This aligns with our overall strategy in the business plan to transition to an internet-focused model that retains subscribers and then transitions them to IPTV and streaming, which is where the country and industry as a whole are headed. For the next couple of slides, I'm going to hand it over to Keith, who will take you through some data.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. Keith DeMartini, your Finance Director. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the financials for the CityNet Services Department as it's articulated in the city's CAFR, which stands for the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. These are the annual financial statements of the city of San Bruno. And so there's a couple lines on this graph that I just want to explain in just a little bit of detail. First is the red line, which shows the net operating loss for the enterprise over the past, this graph goes about 15 or 16 years for actual financial statements. And as you can see, the red line is below the $0 number, which means that the enterprise has been operating in a deficit over the past number of years, which has been explained earlier. And so the net effect of operating in a deficit year after year after year is that it accumulates every year. And so the enterprise's net position, which is the blue line, has continued to go down gradually over that time frame. As you can see, it was operating in a positive net position up until around fiscal year 13-14, and then it started dropping below zero to where it is today with a net operating loss position in the financial statements for fiscal year 2018-19 of just over $15 million. This has been discussed during prior city council meetings where we presented the audited financial statements with the city's auditor and also during our budget presentations. It's also really important to note on this graph that this graph ends at fiscal year 18-19 because those are the most recent audited financial statements. But as Director Krishnamurthy mentioned earlier, the city has done much better at closing this deficit in fiscal year 19-20. And again, it's projected to not have a deficit in fiscal year 2021. So progress is definitely being made. The other notable thing on this graph is because there is a negative net position in the CityNet Services Enterprise Fund, there is due to the general fund, basically meaning that the general fund is subsidizing the activities of the CityNet Services Department until at which point in time the CityNet Services can operate without operating in a deficit going forward. That's important to note on this slide as well. This next slide is an accumulation of the deficit over the past 10 years. And there's a few key points on this slide as well that I'd like to go through. Again, this is sort of another representation of the operational deficit for the CityNet Services Department over the past few years. And as you can see that deficit is actually trending in an upward direction over the past few years, which is definitely a sign in the right direction. You can also see here that the equity transfer, which I did not talk about on the prior slide, but as the City Council was aware during our budget conversations, for many years before fiscal year 19-20, there was an equity transfer from the CityNet Services Enterprise Fund into the general fund, which represented earnings, if you will, from the CityNet Services activities, which then could be used for general fund purposes. Because the enterprise has been operating in a deficit for a number of years, the City Council took an action to gradually reduce the equity transfer and then eventually eliminate it in the fiscal year 19-20 budget. And it's also not included in the fiscal year 2021 budget as well. And then, can be revisited at a later time whether or not to reinstate that equity transfer, at which point the enterprise may turn around and be profitable, and then we consider that at a later time.
Keith, Council, I just want to jump in real quick because this is an important point that I think should not be lost on the Council and the public. When you look at the prior slide, you really need to take the prior slide and this slide together. When you see that net position of $15.2 million, right? That includes the data on the next slide, slide 28, which is the total equity transfer of nearly $8 million. And so it's sort of a two-sided coin, which is absolutely the enterprise has not been covering its full cost really beginning in 2013. But over the last 10 years, what is also true is that the enterprise has been contributing money to the city's general fund to help out the city's general fund, even in years when it had a net operating deficit. And so taken together, on some level, one of the things we've heard is, well, you really can't look at the total $15 million CityNet deficit because they paid the city $8 million of that $15 million. I think that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it, which is, let's assume we were not in the cable franchise business, and our 7,000 customers were 7,000 customers of Comcast or AT&T. Well, they would pay a franchise fee to the city, money to the general fund, to support the city's enterprise, because there's a state franchise agreement that I believe is 5% for cable providers. And so while it was not inappropriate for the cable enterprise to pay the city money, it is also true that because they paid the city money, that helped to accumulate a larger deficit. So in many ways over the last 2 years that I've been here, I've heard sort of both sides of this coin. In reality, they're both true, right? And the decision we made in the 18-19 budget, which is because the enterprise was not financially healthy, meaning it had an operating deficit, we were going to temporarily pause that equity transfer until such time as the enterprise could make that payment and cover its operating costs and its capital costs. And so I think it's just a real important point to pause on, so we understand that there's two sides to that coin, and what happened was totally appropriate.
So I'll turn it back over to Sandy.
Thank you, Keith. I'd like to go back to the subscriber numbers to make one additional point, which is if you go to the months March 2020 through September 2020, we have actually lost some subscribers on internet and we've on cable TV as well, amounting to about 4% of the base. What I'd like to point out at this time is this actually contrasts pretty well with the rest of the pay television industry in the nation. They're experiencing an 8% loss at the current time. We're at about half. It's not great to lose subscribers ever, but be that as it may, when I compare to the national level of subscriber erosion that's taking place across pay TV due to cord cutting, we're actually doing a little better than average. On this slide, we have a reflection of the subscriber data from the 3 MDU complexes which have had fiber installed. They comprise a total of about 17% of the homes in San Bruno and add up to a total of 2,593. We are able to service about 95% of these homes with our fiber installed, and we currently have 68% penetration into these homes. I'd like to point out that the last time I presented to council in March of 2019, we were at a 70% penetration. So some of the subscriber losses that I just alluded to in the previous slide across the system during this past 3 months have happened in these complexes as well. But we still have a very good penetration number compared to the overall system penetration, which is at about 45%. So the fiber effect, in short, is 68 minus 45, which is 23% of additional penetration. The cost of the install was about $2.2 million. And we generate a total of $2.151 million in annual income or annual revenue from these subscribers from these complexes. And out of this $2.151 million, $846 million is attributable to the fiber build itself. So this is the post-fiber revenue growth, about 39% revenue growth, annual revenue growth. We have mapped the performance of these 3 MDUs for CityNet from 2015 through 2020. You will see that we started experiencing subscriber erosion in 2016, even from our 2015 levels. This was just prior to the fiber build, and it was probably due to the increase in competition from AT&T. Now, with our fiber build, we went up pretty substantially in terms of customer growth and have continued growing through to 2020, except for the bottom line in red, which is for Crystal Springs. And there you show a dip from 2019 to 2020. What this is subscriber losses due to increased fiber competition from AT&T. We have lost subscribers to AT&T here, partly due to our fiber having a small piece of equipment called a fiber connector, which is very easily damaged and happened to be damaged at the beginning of the pandemic in quite a few of these apartment units. We have since started rectifying a lot of these damaged pieces, but it's a little too late for several of those customers who have since left due to work from home concerns and have joined AT&T. So the cumulative subscriber growth in MDUs due to the 2016 to 18 fiber rollout comprises about 637 subscribers. So about a 62% in subscriber growth in these three complexes. And I alluded to fiber competition from AT&T leading to subscriber losses. The Shelter Creek penetration has been the best for us, probably due to exclusive access, at least at the start. We have started noticing incursion from AT&T even there. The cumulative 68% penetration we have for fiber is better than the 45% penetration we have at the system level, which kind of leads to the conclusion that the fiber build out has been quite successful for CityNet since its built. One of the aspects of COVID-19 for CityNet has been an explosion in usage. Our internet traffic is up over 100% from 7 to 17 gigabits per day on average. So that's the amount of internet traffic flowing through the system. And it's over 100% growth. In television viewership terms, we have grown over 50% from a normal pre-pandemic month through to the months we have had in these lockdown periods. And it's up to over 22 million minutes a month. These two aspects will come into focus in the next few slides where we talk about customer experience. Our customer experience for CityNet has frequently been called into question, especially in the recent past due to in-home service outages, partial system outages, unanswered phone calls, and some subscriber change notifications that have been either late or lagging. Going back to the first point, in-home service outages, the CPE, the customer premise equipment that we have in place, in terms of set-top boxes, internet modems, cable modems, and the like, are part of dated ecosystems. The older they become, the more defects we are more than likely to experience, which we are seeing in practice. During COVID, the period of these lockdowns since March, the pressure on the system has been enormous. I alluded to the exploding levels of usage of both the internet and television earlier. These again lead to a lot of phone calls to the system. And our technicians not being able to go inside homes through almost the end of August further put pressure on the system itself, because our customers, as can be expected, were experiencing more problems in getting the services to work for them and were calling in greater numbers. Now, we have since resumed, after following COVID protocols, we have resumed in-home visits in a kind of abbreviated fashion, and we expect to see a gradual decrease in these complaints. In terms of partial system outages, 83% of a system, all the non-fiber part of the system, relies on technologically dated HFC infrastructure, hybrid fiber coax infrastructure. The cable itself is 45 years old, the head end is 22 years old, the equipment's failing and has to be replaced on a much more frequent basis as time passes on. This equipment in turn relies on the power grid for power, simply to work. And the more the power grid goes through brownouts and outages, as has been happening with PG&E, the more the equipment tends to fail. Therefore, we have more defects coming from that. So all this keeps the staff, even without going into people's homes, at a very high level of activity in terms of maintaining the system and simply keeping it operational. At this point, I'd like to actually say kudos to the staff at CityNet. They've done a great job in keeping the system up and running through this period of lockdowns. To summarize our customer experience at this stage, where the system's customer relationship management, which comprises everything from the customer service reps taking calls to the software we have on the website to the email systems that we have in place or not, is inadequate. It needs improvement, and we have quite a few of these improvements planned. The basis for customer complaints are fairly logical and they're appropriate. The pricing of television is very high in terms of value delivered overall in the entire marketplace, and we are no special players in that space, being a middleman just like AT&T, just like anybody else. The prices are just high all over. Technology-related faults, as I mentioned in earlier slides, they've been going up because of the age of the equipment, and they are, again, quite valid. When things don't work for a customer, it's quite natural for them to feel rather upset and to want to call the system to complain and to ask for better service. The enterprise, having said all this, is working pretty hard to maintain services to over 7,000 homes. And through this COVID period of lockdowns and work from home, which is likely to go forward into the future, they've been doing a pretty good job of maintaining service levels. A few statistics on the calls actually received by our offsite technical support and after hours through the last fiscal. In July of 2019, the total number of calls received was 981. And in February of 2020, when this whole situation started happening, the number jumped by almost over 100% to 1876. And then it has steadied somewhat to 1332 in this month of June 2020. About 64% of these calls have been answered. So the remainder have not, essentially. These calls were either abandoned or people just gave up or they did not use the callback feature, a variety of reasons. But be that as it may, a good third of the calls were missed. This is concerning our offsite technical support and after hours operations. A good percentage of these callers, the majority, over 80%, were for cable-related issues. So these were the non-upgraded areas, people calling from these areas with problems. The fiber callers were vastly fewer in number, but then so is the size of the fiber footprint. We have only 17% of our system in the footprint. So in summary, there was a jump of over 100% in calls from a normal pre-pandemic month through to the pandemic period. And there was a jump in the calls that were not handled as well. There were calls that were missed. One of the measures that have been taken to make sure we capture some of those missed calls is to install a callback feature. A mistake made in the installation of the callback feature was the number of rings allowed from the time a person called into the support center to the time the feature was activated were too many. It was at about 12 rings, so we have since made a plan to reduce those number of rings to about 4 to 5. On this graph, you have the statistics for the CSRs calls taken from March through August of this year, the whole of the COVID period. Our CSRs took a total of about 9,000 calls, of which about 6,000 were handled and about 3,000 were missed for various reasons. About 1,500, the calls overflowed, which means that people were just kept holding. And while presumably our CSRs were dealing with other customers on longer calls. The average call duration was about 12 to 15 minutes. So it's very much conceivable that calls were missed from others who were kept waiting in the line for long enough that they got frustrated and quit. Calls escaped, which is that somebody dialed in and then immediately hung up, and abandoned, which was simply not answered. One of the big aspects of calls coming into our CSRs is they come into our CSRs during working hours and they generate activity, which is our CSRs have to come out with a service order or a work order, which could comprise an install or a repair. And this graph in 2016 started off at a fairly low level for service calls and then went on to over 1,600 or so of these service orders being generated during the COVID period. Again, it just is an indicator of increased volume, increased demand, and just a more activity happening at the CSR end through the last 6 months. So what have we done to manage the call volume? First, As I mentioned earlier, we've reduced the number of rings on the internal phone system and the offsite call support prior to transition to a callback feature. Second, we have put in a number of self-help videos on the website, and these videos have been produced in-house by our programming manager, Miriam Shalit. We have had our technicians call our customers to walk them through self-help repairs. We resumed in-home visits after following new COVID protocols towards the end of August. And what's coming soon is we are planning to reopen our front office in conjunction with CTHR and facilities after again allowing for enough safety precautions. We also plan to install an automated trouble ticket feature on a website for use by customers. So this would provide yet another avenue for customers to register a complaint without actually having to wait on the phone for our CSRs, and hopefully reduce the amount of calls coming into our CSRs, thereby offering better levels of service for those who do call. The summary of our overall status is that we have provided competitive service in San Bruno for 49 years. We are experiencing technological attrition, which is a gradual reduction in our ability to compete simply because of the age of the equipment and its reaching end of life, end of support situations in many aspects. We embarked on a new approved business plan, which we presented in 2019 to the City Council, and we've had limited success in implementing this. As I mentioned, we have 33% of our base currently on the new rate card. We have started making several of the internal technological moves, but all this depends an upgrade to the underlying technology of the system itself. The internet usage in San Bruno is exploding. We have gone from 1 to 17 gigabits from 2011 through 2020. Fortunately, we were farsighted enough to improve the capacity of our routers, which were increased from 20 gigabits to 30 gigabits, allowing us to absorb this growth in internet usage. Our COVID and work from home situations in San Bruno have further emphasized the benefits of reliable internet service in the community. We're happy to say that CityNet is one of the few systems that have not experienced large-scale slowdowns in speeds thanks to enhanced work from home, which many of the systems across the nation are experiencing. We have made limited investments in installing fiber in select apartment complexes, and these have yielded good multi-year results. We have identified a few single-family residential rollouts, and we have some other developments in the works related to fiber. The system needs more updated delivery technology to provide better internet speeds. Fiber, we think, is the future-proof way to proceed. Our new business model has trended the enterprise in the right direction. Both from the city manager and finance director's comments point in this direction that we have worked successfully towards reducing the deficit over the past couple of years. But this will likely prove inadequate over time because, as I mentioned earlier, we are experiencing attrition. The entire technology underlying our business is slowly losing its effectiveness or ability to compete in this market. And each time we go through a period of time or a cycle of necessary replacements, we're just reducing the overall effectiveness of the system to the point where competition becomes very challenging. We also, of course, significantly need to improve the customer experience through all the points I made earlier, which puts us at this particular crossroads that in order to compete effectively, we must proceed with a comprehensive fiber upgrade. This brings me to the second part of my presentation, which deals with the business strategies and the fiber upgrade plan itself. The way internet speed works and why it's important is the more of appliances, the more of users you have for the internet connection you have in your house, the more speed you need. And what this slide shows is if you do what is typical in an American household, which is have a computer that's working, connected to the internet, you stream something, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, you have a gaming device on, you have a smartphone on, you have a tablet on, what you're doing is using or sipping from the same pipe of bandwidth that's coming into your home. If you have a low internet speed, that bandwidth gets consumed pretty fast, you will experience a slowdown. The higher the internet speed you have, such as a 1 gig internet, would give you almost limitless ability to use all these devices and more. What is fiber to the home? It's a relatively new technology. It's been around for 15, 20 years, but its large-scale use has started coming into play over the last 6 to 8 years. It allows for the transmission of digital data over fiber lines, which extend all the way into the home. The life of this technology is pretty good because the life of fiber is 30 to 50 years. The big advantage with this technology is there is no electricity in the fiber lines. Unlike in the system we currently use, which depends on electricity for power to keep all the various pieces of equipment working and connected, fiber technology does not require power. There is no because there is no power, there's no radiation hazard, and it's very scalable. So even if we talk about installing 1 gig fiber internet today, that same fiber can be scaled up to potentially 100 gigabits through change of electronics, as and when technology, cost, and market desire allow for it. What is the difference between?
If I can really quick, I want to back up to the prior slide with the fact that fiber doesn't use electricity. It's a key point that we haven't actually touched on a lot, which is for resiliency. Let's say we have a PSPS or a brownout. We have the ability to power our head in, and with fiber, we can pipe the connection through to the home. If you're cut off from PG&E during an outage, but you have a generator where you can power your equipment, you can actually have internet service and TV service if you're doing IPTV. And so that's an important resiliency piece of fiber to the home that we really haven't talked a lot about. By getting out of our current system, which relies on taps and nodes, all of which that require power throughout the system. If we can power the core enterprise with fiber, we can pipe that signal to your home. And if you're out off the grid but have a generator, you're up and running and you can communicate. It's an extremely important piece of resiliency and safety for the community.
Thank you. So the difference between fiber optic and cable internet. In fiber, the data is sent via small, flexible strands of glass that transmit light. Cable internet uses cable TV infrastructure to transmit data in bits and bytes. Fiber is much faster over greater distances. That means there is no loss of signal. Cable internet, the more people you have sharing the connection, the slower your speeds, because they're all sipping from the same pipe, and there is a loss of signal as the distance from the head end increases. So fiber is faster, more reliable. It's delivered on a dedicated line to the home, and it's more consistent in speed even during peak usage times. And it's also less likely to go down during a power outage simply because of the points city manager made just a couple of minutes ago. There is no electricity involved, reduced fire risk, and it can be installed to your home. So it's a fiber to the home that we're talking about, and therefore harder to hack. The fewer points of connection and power there are in the pathway to your home, the fewer the chances that you're going to get hacked. Fiber can lastly withstand more temperature fluctuations and be submerged in water, which even today's wildfires is kind of in the opposite direction of where things are actually at. This slide we believe is important because of all the talk about 5G deployments in the market. Fiber is vastly better than 5G for internet performance in the home. Of course, 5G has the big positivity of being mobile, whereas fiber is built to be fixed line, wireless internet delivery to the home. Performance for fiber is 1 gig up and down, that's downstream and upstream, and it's come standard. 5G, while they say it can do 1 gig, the more standard version that they look at achieving in the marketplace is about 300 megabits. Performance during peak times, fiber has no variance. You can increase the load almost to an infinite level. The performance level of the internet itself would be the same. 5G, of course, could get overloaded depending on the traffic at a given tower. So let's say there are 100 people at one tower and 5 at another. The tower that has only 5 will, of course, have better service and better performance as opposed to the tower that has 100. Cell towers, fiber does not have any, does not need. 5G would require up to 240 a square mile, so at 60 per carry. So given there are, well, right now there are 3 carriers, but it would come down to about maybe 180 or 200 towers per square mile. Electromagnetic radiation, which many people have talked about in their presentations to the council, from 5G, there are none in fiber. With 5G, there's a possibility of both thermal and non-thermal EMR or electromagnetic radiation. Fiber has no restrictions on reception. 5G could have reception issues from rain fade, line of sight restrictions, and signal blockage. Uptime reliability, it's been tested over and again in pretty much every market around the country. Fiber's at 99.99%. 5G, nobody knows. And customer service, with us, we are local, we are hands-on. With 5G, it's by definition remote. The rationale for a fiber build-out from a consumer point of view is, of course, if they have more apps, or the more apps there are, and at last count, there were like 4 million apps in the Apple App Store and about the same number in the Google App Store or the Android App Store. The more apps there are, the more bandwidth is needed for customers and the higher the speeds that are needed for the internet. The more connected appliances there are, the more the need for connectivity. The same goes for internet video. In terms of a smart city, fiber would be a great asset to have in terms of smart mobility, smart society, smart home, smart retail, smart care, you name it. As things go more and more connected to the internet, the need for faster internet connectivity, more processing just keeps going up. The whole of this slide is captured by the phrase Internet of Things, IoT, which is a big term in the technology world. This slide refers to the specifics of advantages delivered by fiber to broadband. Contrary to popular belief, even 5G depends on a lot of fiber for the backhaul. Utilities. Fiber helps out with smart grid, smart home automation, grid security, and energy efficiency. The same for various aspects of transportation, healthcare, and public safety. This is a slide that's already dated by about a year and a half, but it still holds true at a base level, which is research says fiber improves property values by 3% in a given community. It builds the local GDP by 1% and improves rental values by up to 8%. As of this year, the state of American fiber and broadband networks there are about 63 publicly owned fiber to the home citywide networks across the country, and 63 cable networks, so an identical number. There are 237 communities which publicly own fiber services available only to business districts. And there's 120 communities with dark fiber, which means the fiber is built out but available for lease by other players, by somebody else. There are 230 communities in 21 states with 1 gig publicly owned networks, that is owned by cities and other forms of government, and 330 communities served by utility companies. So it's still a growing phenomenon, but there is a growing interest on the part of American cities to build out fiber for their communities. Some of the more visible examples are Ammon, Idaho, which had a plan put in place and has been operational since about 2017 with 1 gig fiber. The city assessed a $3,000 per home utility tax payable either in installments over a period of 20 years or as a lump sum, and then provides internet access through local private players who are invited to provide access at rates as low as $50 a month for 1 gig service. Fort Collins, Colorado is another example. They spent $120 million building out mostly underground fiber network for their community. The business strategy that CityNet adopted in 2019 after the approval of council was to pivot to an ISP strategy, which is primarily focused on being an internet service provider, but with provisioning of 3 different services, which include the television, internet access, and phone. And the thought was to move towards a thick pipe and a thin pipe strategy, which is a thick pipe strategy would involve owning 100% of the customer relationship, and where we would provide the set-top box in the customer's home. We would pretty much own that experience, starting from the TV guide onto the channels we provide, as well as other services, including internet connectivity. The thin pipe strategy, on the other hand, is pretty much designed to allow us to coexist with whoever our subscriber chooses to use for various other services riding on our internet, such as they might just choose to have us for the internet, but choose to look at Netflix or Hulu or Amazon for their television access, which would, and YouTube for internet access and for streaming channels, which would work fine with our strategy, the way we have crafted it starting in 2019. So we are looking at doing a hybrid of both 100% last mile subscriber relationship as well as a shared subscriber relationship. The idea here being we want to be the party responsible for delivering the last mile of the internet to your home, but we do not necessarily want to own every piece of that last few inches into the home, because in terms of resources, we cannot compete with the Apples and the YouTubes and the other providers who are investing and have invested a lot of money into building out the last inch in the subscriber's home. In terms of system level strategies, the various strategies that we have put in place, even at the time we presented to the council in 2019, have largely been adopted. On this slide, I have three color codes, with green being those of the strategies that we have underway as of today. The purple color indicating those that we have in limited implementation, and the red being those where no action has been taken. In terms of a product strategy, we pivoted towards the ISP, as I mentioned before, and the focus of the ISP was delivered through a new rate card, which involves offering 1 gig service with local TV bundled into one package, or the best available speed, which at this time is 300 megabits per second, and local TV for the period to be covered even while we go fiber. Pricing strategy has been implemented, which involves, as before, no contracts, reasonable price points compared to where the market's at the given time, at this point in time, and a one-stop bill for all of our services. The content acquisition strategy that we have followed has also largely been put in place. We have a tool that allows us to collect data based on the viewership of up to 9,500 of our 12,500 set-top boxes we have in the marketplace. And this is real-time data. It allows us to see at an aggregated, anonymous level what our people are watching, and then to make programming decisions going forward based on that, wherever the opportunity affords itself. This is going to come increasingly into play as we negotiate programming contracts for renewal, and allow us to hopefully negotiate lower rates for these services going forward. In terms of licensing cost controls, I put this in purple simply because while the first part is done, we have yet to enter substantial negotiations with several of the large licensing partners we work with for television content. A few of these are coming up, the first of which is Univision, the Hispanic television channel provider, which is coming up for renewal and discussion starting next month. So the enterprise business strategy as a whole remains, as we described to the council last year when we presented the plan, remains focused on becoming an ISP with a television and phone business as add-on services. In terms of marketing, we have held off on grassroots campaigns because we aim to do those campaigns in conjunction with the fiber rollout as we roll out into several neighborhoods across San Bruno. What we have focused on instead, in a very small way, is informational and themed marketing. A recent example of this was the insert we did with the water bill announcing the resumption of sports, live sports on television. It was just informational, and it was themed on the arrival of sports back on TV. We don't do promotions. We stick with the same everyday low price. The strategy behind this being that we do not want to enter into an expensive, revenue-consuming set of activities which have to be consistently repeated at great cost to the enterprise itself. In terms of tech strategy, standardization, we have started doing that across our set-top boxes in terms of planning for the move towards IPTV, but but we have yet to meaningfully do anything in the areas of multicast, internet protocol television, or bring your own device, all of which would become more feasible as and when we upgrade to IPTV and upgrade to fiber itself. In terms of the operational strategy, the day-to-day operations of the enterprise, we have been replacing some tabs and nodes as they go back, but it is a challenging process. There is a large amount of equipment out in the marketplace right now, and our revenues do not allow for large-scale purchases of replacements at this point in time, but we make do with what we have. So it's not a perfect arrangement by any means, but we are doing the best we can to keep the system up and running and with as few faults as possible. Key performance indicators. We have started trying to implement it, but we have yet to see a single no-fault day, and we have reduced truck rolls by a certain percentage, but not by as large a percentage as would be necessary to declare it a success. In terms of system-wide solution deployments, we haven't done anything effective in this area simply because the underlying technology has still needed a lot of work just to keep it functional. We developed a business plan which we presented last year for the fiber, or connected to the pivot of the business itself of the enterprise, as well as connected to the fiber rollout, which would be the underpinning of the enterprise itself going forward into the future and make this entire business plan feasible in terms of actual play out in the market. We are requesting a total of $12.24 million for the entire build out of the fiber across the system, and to show the payout of this or the payoff of this requested amount, what we have developed is a business model which has three different scenarios: a conservative, a moderate, and an aggressive scenario. The idea behind these three scenarios and the development of these scenarios is that over a multi-year period, which would be the life or the length of time to take to pay off any amount funded for the fiber upgrade, a lot of variables can play a role, and these can influence business outcomes. So we wanted to have a visibility into what the business might do going forward in a tough business scenario, as opposed to somewhere or a point in time where things might become very advantageous to the business. These scenarios, as I mentioned before, covered a payoff of the $12.24 million sought to fund the fiber upgrade. And in terms of the scenarios themselves, the conservative scenario envisages growth from 45% of the homes in San Bruno serviced at this point in time, which is the actual number, to 56%, and a payoff period of 15 years. In terms of a moderate scenario, we were looking to grow from 45 to 66. So 10% more than the conservative scenario, but then the payoff would change to 13 years. And in terms of an aggressive scenario, we were looking at growing from 45 to 68%, while the 66 and 68 from moderate to aggressive do not look very different. The difference really comes in the periods in between, that is maybe at year 10 or year 9 or year 8, where we would have a much higher percentage of growth in the aggressive model as opposed to the moderate. In this scenario, the payoff would be done as quickly as 10 years from the time of launch. What will most likely end up happening in reality is a mix of all three, with more of the years between now and year 15 being in the conservative range, and a few of the more fortunate years being in the moderate and aggressive kinds of scenarios. So the overall period envisaged for the repayment of any upgrade loan would be in the interval of 20 to 30 years. The way we did our business modeling for the enterprise, assuming the funding of the fiber upgrade and its payoff over a period of 20 to 30 years, was that we would see a gradual increase in ARPU, or the average revenue per unit, from the amount it was at in January of 2019, which is $110, to a projected range of between $111 and $139. To interject a point of reality in this, the current ARPU as of this month is $107. So we're about $4 off the projection that I have in this slide. The contribution to the ARPU, we were seeing the internet going from 37% in 2019 to about between 44 and 56% in 2020 to 2034. And TV going down from 42% to 38%, to a range between 38 and 49%. So essentially, we would see a slight slimming down of the TV revenues over time. Telephone remains at a low number. We currently have, prior to 2019, when we changed the business model, we were at about 4%. Currently, we are doing a little over 2%, and we project a range between 1 and 5 in the plan. The rollout plan itself has been envisaged in 7 phases, comprising the whole of the system across the city of San Bruno. And the 7 phases, in no particular order, include west of Skyline, northeast of Skyline, southeast of Skyline, the City Park area, west of El Camino, west of the railroad tracks, and the business park. The fiber upgrade project is projected to cost a total of $6,804,000 in construction, $3.8 million in equipment, leading to a total of a working capital requirement of about $10.640 million, with a 15% contingency amount, which is $1.5 or $1.6 million, and leading to a grand total of $12.237 million. So the whole project, we estimate, will cost $12.237. This, bearing in mind, that includes a contingency of 15% or almost $1.6 million. The way the plan would be rolled out would include the hiring of a project consultant. We have had a fiber consultant in place for most of the period over the last 2 years. This consultant is currently in shelter in place and will likely come back to resume the build as and when we start the project. We would look at hiring this project consultant and 4 temporary technicians who would be contractors for the duration of the build out, stretching over 2 years. As I mentioned before, we would roll out the fiber in 7 phases, and this rollout would comprise mostly an aerial rollout, which is the 93% of the system that is carried on 2,692 poles through the city of San Bruno. We would use a method called overlashing, which is allowed by the FCC. What this means is we would lay the fiber, which is actually very light and very thin, on top of the current HFC hybrid fiber coax cable, and eventually either pull out the cable underneath or even leave the cable in place, because the weight factor would not change significantly because of us doing this. And this is allowed by the FCC. We would not be breaking any rules or any laws in doing so. Every home and business in San Bruno will be passed by our fiber. Every customer will have access to a fiber draw, so true fiber to the home. The rollout cost that we project is vastly lower than other comparable rollouts for somebody who's starting from scratch, simply because we have an existing business in place. We do not require pole permits, which comprise a very big cost of any fiber rollout project if you're starting from scratch. We have had these pole permits in place since 1971. We have an experienced team, and we have good cost controls in place with the various providers. Also, with the additional advantage of being in a recessionary environment for the overall market, which leads to price pressures for manufacturers and sellers of equipment, and who would look at keeping costs at either the same levels as before or even reducing those costs going forward. So we believe we are poised for success with this plan to roll out fiber, if approved, for a timely and on-budget execution.
Okay, and so now we're ready to talk about the revenue generating and the financing options. But the question to council is, do we want to break? It says 10 minutes there. We could even have 5 up to council. No, we know that that was a lot of information.
I don't need a break, but if staff wants a break or other council members want a break, I'm fine with that.
Ready?
Same.
Ditto.
We'll keep going.
Okay. Let's continue.
All right, we'll keep trucking. Okay, now we'll turn it over to
Manager, staff's okay to continue?
yeah, we're good. We will keep rolling, and now we will turn it over to Finance Director DeMartini.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and council members. So I'm going to talk about a number of revenue generating and potential financing options if the city was to move forward with implementing the fiber to the home project. And so I'm going to go into each one of these in some level of detail in upcoming slides, but at a high level, staff has been researching and trying to articulate a number of different strategies in order to move forward with implementing this project. On the revenue generating options, those include potential increases to existing CityNet services subscription fees. Could also be the implementation of a surcharge on the CityNet fees, which I will define and describe in the upcoming slides. The city, as the City Council is aware, we have a development impact fee program, and we are able to leverage development impact fees for the fiber to the home project if the City Council chooses to do so. There is also a taxing option. There's an ability to implement a user utility tax, which I will describe as well. There are also some financing options. So the financing options, again, would be just to allow for the expediting of the implementation of the fiber to the home project so that we can get the required capital up front to implement and then pay for that over time through the various revenue generating options. The financing options would include potentially using community benefits from development projects, potentially using the Measure G district sales tax revenue source, and then issuing debt in order to do so. So I'm going to walk through each one of these in some level of detail and be able to answer any questions that you might have. So first, let's start with the revenue generating options. The first one being, it's fairly straightforward. The City Council could choose to increase the monthly subscription fees for the existing CityNet services fees. That could take two approaches. One would be to simply increase the base fee for a specific service or multiple services. It could also be the implementation of a surcharge per subscriber. A surcharge is a fee that sits on top of an existing fee, and that surcharge represents a rate typically, and that would generate additional revenue over time that would be used to implement a technology or a capital improvement. The city currently has a surcharge on a building permit, and that existing surcharge for building permits is used to implement technology improvements over time. And so the implementation of a surcharge on a CityNet services fee represents a very similar structure where we can generate that money over time, and it can be used to fund and or finance the fiber to the home project. And so just some context to consider, if a 5% surcharge was implemented on a subscriber's bill today in fiscal year 2021, based on the current revenue assumptions in the enterprise, that surcharge would have generated approximately $541,000 in the current fiscal year. And so we'll come back to that number later on in the presentation. The implementation of a surcharge or a fee increase is fairly straightforward. It simply requires the City Council approval of a resolution. So the next revenue generating option is to leverage the existing development impact fee program that is currently in place. As Council is aware, this impact fee program was implemented back in May of 2019. A development impact fee is a one-time fee on new development that will help to pay for new infrastructure improvements that is required to serve growth. And so fiber to the home is an infrastructure improvement, and it will serve growth in this community, so it is an appropriate expenditure to use for development impact fees. The current impact fee program does generate and accumulate funds for CityNet services. Depending on the land use of the development project, a very, very small percentage, just anywhere between 1% to 2%, is generated for CityNet services. To date, there hasn't been too much impact fees that have been generated, just a little over $110,000. The city is able to borrow from a variety of different development impact fee program areas to be used for other sources, which I'll explain in more detail on the next slide. The use of development impact fees, again, it's fairly straightforward. It just requires the City Council's adoption of a resolution about how those funds are to be appropriated. This slide here summarizes what all the individual programs in the Development Impact Fee program and how much goes to each program. So let's say there's one single family house that is developed. The current Development Impact Fee paid on that one single family house is $23,783. Of that amount, $532 is to be dedicated for CityNet services. And you can see what the other allocations are around here. As I said on the prior slide, there is some flexibility for the City Council to borrow from the other program areas for a specific capital project. So you would have the ability of doing that. Based on the current development pipeline right now in the city of San Bruno, the city is anticipating upwards of $9 million that will be generated in development impact fees based on the current pipeline. It is rather difficult to determine the timing of when the city expects to receive those development impact fee payments. So it's a little bit risky to sort of to make some sort of guesses on when those funds are to be collected. The next revenue generating option, which I'm going to go into quite some detail, is to consider a new tax. And the one that's before you this evening is a user utility tax, or a UUT. A UUT is a tax that's imposed by a city on the consumption of utility services. And in this situation, a utility such as cable or internet is considered a utility. It may include other utilities as well, such as electricity, gas, water, so on and so forth. The implementation of the tax is determined by the city, and it requires voter approval. And all UUTs that are levied in California are considered general purpose taxes. That's very similar to the recently voter approved Measure G sales tax measure in San Bruno, which again is a general purpose tax. UUTs are typically spent for general purposes. So if the city were to move forward with a UUT, it could not the proceeds of that tax initiative could not solely be used for the fiber to the home project. It would be used for general city purposes. This graph here on the bottom shows what the current UUT tax rate is for the cities in California that have it. So for most cities, the tax rate is between 4 and 5%. But as you can see, it sort of follows a generic bell curve distribution for the tax rate amounts. This slide right here summarizes the UUT tax rates and the revenue that is generated from them for the 6 cities in San Mateo County that currently have it. You can see Daly City, East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Pacifica, Portola Valley, and Redwood City have a current UUT. And the UUT rate ranges anywhere from 1% all the way up to 6.5% in Pacifica. And you can see which utilities are currently being taxed. It's important to note that most of these UUTs have been in place for many, many years. There has not been a new UUT in quite some time in these cities. As I mentioned earlier, the implementation of the UUT does require an election. It requires voter approval. In order to do that, we would implement many of the same strategies that we have done in the recently approved Measure G district sales tax measure, as well as the current cannabis and TOT revenue measures that are on the November 2020 ballot, which might include the implementation of some community polling, professional consulting support. The UUT ordinance would have to be adopted by the City Council before it was to be put on the ballot. And the next available general election where a UUT could be considered by the voters would be November of 2022, so 2 years from now. And staff worked on a potential revenue projection for different rates that would be considered for a UUT, ranging from 1% all the way up to 7%, and listing on this table all the different types of utilities that could be taxed and what the total revenue projection would be. So for example, if you were to look at the 5% estimate UUT column, if all of these utilities were taxed, it could be conservatively projected that the city would realize approximately $7.8 million annually from the implementation of those taxes. But the city council would also need to consider if they wanted to choose to tax all of the utilities or only some of them and at which rate. So this is just meant to give you a sense of sort of the context and the magnitude of the revenue to be generated from such a tax. The implementation of the UT is fairly straightforward, but it is involved. It's a process. UTs are actually paid by utility providers like Comcast or like PG&E. The city would consider entering into an agreement with a consultant to help assist with the discovery and the collection, the reporting, and the audit services of this tax measure, similar to our other taxing sources today. We would receive remittances on either a monthly or a quarterly basis. It's important to note that the service delivery for UTs has been evolving over time with sort of the increase of wireless and voice and data, the increase in streaming services as well. So the environment for UT has been evolving over the years. There are many benefits from a UT, and I won't go through all these right now, just for the sake of time. But UTs do tend to yield a rather substantial portion of a municipality's general fund. They are a general purpose tax, so they can be used for multiple services and capital projects. They're levied on multiple utilities, and it applies very broadly. And UTs are generally not as sensitive to an economic downturn as some other taxes, such as sales tax or property tax. It remains fairly stable. And this last slide on UT is just a summary of which UT measures in the last 9 or 10 years have been approved by California voters. And this slide just goes to show you that it's not a guarantee that if the voters were to vote on a UT, that it will be successful. In 2018, for example, of the 18 UT measures that were on, only 10 of them actually passed. So the next section I'm going to speak to are the various financing options that the City Council may consider with sort of expediting the implementation of the Fiber to the Home project. The first financing option I'd like to present is potentially using community benefits. So as the council is aware, there are two rather large development projects that are in the development pipeline. The first one is the YouTube Phase 1 project, and they have a community benefit package with a projected payment of $15.4 million. And the expected timing of that is in fiscal year 22-23. The Mills Park project has a projected payment of $10 million spread out over a few years, as shown on this slide. So in total, there's approximately $25.4 million of community benefit funds that will be available, that's projected to be available in the next few years that could be used to finance this project. So this money is available for consideration. The next funding source that could be used to help finance or expedite this project would be to utilize the Measure G district sales tax funds. So as council again is aware, in November 2019, the voters approved a half-cent sales tax district measure that took effect on April 1st of 2020. It increased the rate from 9.25% to 9.75%. And pre-COVID, the projection was that it would generate approximately $4 million annually, again, for general city purposes. The City Council could consider two things with this funding source. You could consider simply a direct allocation of Measure G funds to pay for the Fiber to the Home project, or you could consider loaning the CityNet Services department these funds and then negotiate sort of a payback period like you would be financing this from a bank over some period of time. And then there are a few instances of doing this with CityNet Services in the past with the multifamily dwelling unit projects where the general fund has loaned the CityNet Services department and required a payback over a period of time. The final financing option I'll present is to issue your standard debt in order to finance this. It would take the form of a lease revenue bond, a public offering, and it would be sold on the public market. The loan duration would be anywhere between 15 to 30 years of a payback period. And then the annual debt service payment, depending on the term of the loan, it would be anywhere between $600,000 up to $1 million annually of a repayment. The timing of this, it would take approximately 3 months in order to sort of gain City Council's approval, and then go through all the necessary steps with our municipal financial advisor and work with bond counsel to issue the debt. There are very, very favorable financing terms right now. And so we could expect very favorable rates, which would be advantageous for the lowest possible annual debt service payments on this. It's important to note that given the existing negative fund balance in CityNet services that we articulated earlier in this presentation, that the debt would be pledged by the general fund. So in effect, what that means is the general fund is on the hook for paying the annual debt service payment if the CityNet Services Department is unable to do so. This slide here summarizes the impact on the city's debt portfolio if the City Council wanted to move forward with exploring the issuance of debt. Before jumping into this table, it's really important to note here that the city does not have very much debt. It's not over leveraged. There is plenty of capacity for the city to take on debt. And there's a couple metrics that we look at when we issue debt, and I'll just go through one as an example here. The one I like to talk about the most is the debt service burden, that third one. And the metric here is that a municipality really shouldn't have more than 8% of its annual general fund expenditures go towards debt service payments. It's really critical that we make our debt service payments, and so we want that to be not a very large portion of our general fund budget. Right now, our general fund budget debt service payments are about 4.8% of the total general fund budget. If we were to issue debt for fiber to the home, it would increase that rate to about 6.1%. Again, that's well below the 8% target, but it would potentially limit future debt that we may want to issue as a city, but probably not. There's plenty of capacity. So I'll turn this back over to Sandy for this slide.
Thanks, Keith. So as part of the modeling for the fiber project overall, we were asked to present a slide which would show the payout of a potential loan taken to fund the fiber build out from within project earnings or within the fiber related earnings from the enterprise going forward through a period of 15 years. And the total we have come out with using the conservative model as a basis is with a market share in year 1 of 45% and ending year 15 at 56%, we would see a contribution from fiber itself at 3% in year 1, going up to 20% in year 15, and which in dollar terms would translate to a total of 18.3 million. And this would be the earnings from within the fiber build out itself that could be turned around and used to at least a certain percentage to pay off either the interest payment or part of the principal and the interest. That was pretty much it on this slide. Thank you.
So before we conclude tonight, I just wanted to kind of summarize the major revenue and financing takeaways from that section of the presentation. First is that if the City Council were to consider an increase to the fee or a surcharge, the implementation of that could be fairly quick. Again, it just requires City Council adoption of a resolution. If there were to consider a UUT, a tax, that would take at least 2 years to implement. Again, the next available election for this to be considered would be November 2022. Debt financing, as mentioned earlier, it would require the backing of additional dedicated revenue in order to minimize the impact on other funding sources. And that if we were to consider additional or sort of alternative funding sources such as development impact fees, community benefits, and or Measure G, those funds could be used for this project, but that means they couldn't be used for other projects or other priorities for the city. And some of those other priorities for the city may include replenishing our reserves. As council is aware, in the adopted 2021 budget, we were required to dip into some of our reserves in order to balance the budget. And so these funding sources can be used for the replenishment of those reserves, or many other capital improvement projects that are a priority. such as Fire Station 51 and 52 and many other projects. So it's just a prioritization conversation about how those funds are to be appropriated. If council wants to move quickly on the fiber to the home project, the best course of action will likely involve a combination of these strategies, both revenue generating and debt issuance. And so there's an example that we have on this slide. Mentioned earlier, if there was a 5% surcharge on the subscription fees, that would generate approximately $541,000 annually. If we were to issue debt to finance and expedite the implementation of the project, the annual debt service payment would be approximately $600,000. And so that gap could be filled with leveraging Measure G or some other general fund source in order to sort of fill that gap to make the annual debt service payment. And that could also come from an annual allocation from development impact fees, community benefits, and or Measure G. So this is an example of how we could move forward with securing the needed revenue and the needed debt financing to move forward with this project. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the city manager.
Yeah, so with that, council, that concludes the 80-slide deck that staff went through. It was a lot of information, and I want to thank Director DeMartini, and this is his very last council presentation, as he will be leaving us to take a job with a city where he will relocate his family, and we wish him the best. And thank you for all of your service. And we moved up this presentation so he can be here tonight to provide that to the city council. And so, council, I won't recap everything that we heard or you heard, but we heard a lot. But we are where we were, which is we're at a crossroads. What I would say to you as your city manager is that while there are certainly on the horizon community benefit monies that would come due, that's probably not the avenue that we can wait for, because we frankly can't afford to wait if we are going to really save this enterprise and stay in the business. And so we feel confident, and we know council was confident in February of 2019 with the core business plan, and that fiber to the home is the path forward. If we are going to be on that path, the enterprise really needs an infusement of investment for new infrastructure. And so from the staff perspective, we certainly have the capacity and the desire. And I think the options you have been presented tonight provide a path forward. And so while we're not looking for final direction tonight, we have provided this presentation at the request of council to begin that process of stepping toward a financing plan for the fiber to the home, should we still be on that path.
You could take down the shared screen, please.
Absolutely.
There we go. Good. We're all there. Okay. So we'll open it to council and Councilmember Mason.
Thank you for the presentation. So I was wondering, are we looking today at splitting up that $12 million into the potential of certain sections of San Bruno at a time, so that, let's say that we don't commit right now to 12 million, but we commit to 2 million, and then we see what the revenue generation is in that particular part of San Bruno, and move on from there. Which I feel like we've tried with Shelter Creek, which is doing very well.
Right. Well, the plan that has been presented before council is really for the entire project. It's a 24-month build out. And essentially, while you're doing phase 1, you're planning phase 2. While you're doing phase 2, you're planning phase 3. And the plan involves actually bringing on to the city staff consultants and employees versus hiring a construction firm to do it. And so when we bring that staff on, we really want to roll from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 throughout the 7 phases. And to truly upgrade the infrastructure, you really, because we're talking about single family homes, you really need to do it all at once. And so what we would want to do is embark on a plan knowing that we are doing the entire enterprise and increasing and essentially reinvesting in the infrastructure that pipes CityNet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the other question I had is, should we take from the Measure G as a loan? You mentioned that was an option. Can that loan come with, so I know the rate right now that Director DeMartini mentioned was 2.5 to 3%. So it's historically low, but if we were to do an agreement really with ourselves, could we also make sure that there's a payback? So it would be like a 1% return on the investment that the taxpayers have agreed to entrust us with.
Absolutely. You can Measure G is general fund money, and the city council, if they wanted to structure a loan to the CityNet fund, can structure terms surrounding that loan. What's also an option available to council is to embark with debt financing, but then pay that back over time with community benefits. I don't want council to take my prior comments that we can't wait on community benefits to mean that community benefit money can't repay back the loan, but essentially to wait to start for almost 2 years will be a challenge.
Right. The debt financing for when you refer to debt financing, is that an umbrella term that could include the Measure G as well? Because I would rather not borrow from an outside source when we can borrow and repay ourselves with an interest rate paid back to ourselves.
Sure. So how it's structured, you actually have to do both. So Measure G is an annual source of money that we just started receiving, and so there is not a $12 million pot of Measure G. And so we would see outside debt funds with, let's say, if we did the entire amount for 30 years, roughly a $600,000 annual debt service payment, and we can pay that back. We can pay that with Measure G money on an annual basis. But each sort of year of $600,000 we take from Measure G is what we would structure as a loan to the cable fund that they would have to pay back, or pay back from community benefits or another source.
Okay. I mean, I have just a lot of discomfort around it because that's not what was proposed, as has been kind of my broken record. But again, I'd prefer to borrow from ourselves and pay ourselves back that interest as much as possible. And then the last comment that I'll make for now is just I would not support the UUT. I just think we've been raising rates already. We raised our cable earlier this year. We've been raising water for 8 years. I just don't think it's the time to consider it. I do appreciate that was laid out as an option, but I don't think now's the right time for that option. Thank you.
Other colleagues?
To the chair. I guess there was a lot said, so I guess we'll stick to the most recent part of the presentation, which is the financing part. I hear what Councilmember Mason's saying, so I have to ditto and echo those comments. When I first heard the mention of Measure G, I'm like, kind of cringe. But I understand as a payback and to earn a percentage, so I think that's a fair statement. I'm also not concerned. I'm also very concerned about raising taxes, because once you implement them, they don't go away, and we all know that works. I'd say increasing fees as long as we can be competitive. We do a lot of surcharges in the water utility business that I'm in, and they are things that kind of have a start and an end date, so they do it for so many months, so maybe there's something there. So I guess it's really a combination of things. I think the UUT doesn't sound like a good option. It's a 2-year implementation, and there's a lot of, I think, negative things to that as well. I'd like to see maybe some of the community benefits from development impact fees, sort of a whole host of things, but I think we need to be careful about raising taxes and not being competitive. With all of that said, this is a tough decision. We are at a very serious crossroads when it comes to making this decision going forward. Sandeep's presentation is very well thought out, very well presented. I think we have the ability to really be successful, not in the cable business, but in the broadband business, if we do it right. Some of the things that concern me are simply customer service. We got to be able to do that right, and we have to be able to do that in a way that we can be competitive with others. So, although we're talking about the financing piece, I don't even know if we've made a decision to think we can go that direction, and is it even plausible or doable, and can we sustain it? Can we maintain it? There's a lot of concerns. So I'll let my other colleagues speak.
Vice Mayor Salazar.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Laura on the fact that, talking about the financing is sort of a secondary conversation, and we do need to decide what the decision is. Are we going to invest in it, or at what point do we cut bait? In terms of what we're going to do going forward. So say, for example, that we do decide that we want to make this investment. Are there other decision points farther downstream where we can stop and reassess and say, okay, the investment is paying off the way we thought, or is it going in the wrong direction? And do we turn around and decide that we're going to sell the enterprise at that point? And what happens to our investment? Do we get our money back? Or is this a sunk cost that we anticipate we won't be able to recover because there's no market for it, or because competitors are already putting their own infrastructure in place? So I think understanding those decision points as we move forward is important. And if there's only one decision point, and that's if we decide we're going forward and then we're all in regardless, I think that puts a lot more risk on that one decision, and it'll be something we'll have to consider a lot more carefully. And just in terms of all the financing options, Keith, one of the things I'm going to miss most about you is just your straight talk, and I really appreciate the comments you made there at the end about whatever we decide to do, that means there's something else that we won't be able to do. And all of these options that you've laid out are it makes sense that these are things that are available to us, but they're also sources of revenue that we had already considered for other things. And we saw our revenue essentially cut short by $8 million because of COVID. We don't know when that's going to end. And knowing that these projects are in the pipeline, at least in my mind, I saw these as our safety net for just doing everything else that we need to do. And so committing these funds to this project, which is, I do believe it's important, but I don't think it's as essential as some of the other services that we have to provide. And so I'm not comfortable in saying that, the community benefit will be committed to this only. And even though we're going to see a return on this, hopefully, if everything goes the way it's supposed to, that these funds could be tied up for 10 to 20 years before we're able to bring them back out and do some of the other things that we've committed to the community, especially around Measure G and the community benefits that I think the community's been waiting for a long time to implement some of these programs, and tying it up in this may not seem fair, especially when we're anticipating that market share is only going to grow to the 50-ish percentage of residents. That means that half of our residents are doing without, so that the 50% that do partake will have this benefit. So I don't know if there's real equity there, and that word equity has been thrown around a lot. And if we talk about the type of household that will be able to afford fiber at a competitive rate, that's probably not everybody in San Bruno. And so some people will be left out. And if we take funds from other projects to fund this, now we're taking those other potential benefits out of circulation for the entire community, and potentially only benefiting part of the community. So I've got some issues with that as well. Again, I think, Sandeep, you've done an amazing job in turning the enterprise around. I'm not inclined to want to pull the plug on it, but it doesn't look like we have a lot of really good options here. I mean, issuing the debt looks like we would have to issue some type of debt, and it doesn't look like the enterprise will be able to service that debt right off the bat. So the general fund is going to have to step in, and it's really, the tables have really turned on that, because cable for the longest time was supplementing what we were doing with the general fund. Now it needs the general fund's help, but it's coming at a time when the general fund really doesn't have a lot of help to offer. So those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Medina.
Yeah, I think I'm next. Wow, this is a lot of information. This is the first time the council is seeing this presentation. We did get it a little earlier this evening, but we also had a meeting that started at 6. So evaluating this decision right now, probably not at my best, but here it goes. I wanted to bring up some comments in the discussion leading up to the financing option, because I know that's the biggest thing right now, but some really a key important point that probably isn't emphasized enough, that CityNet Services doesn't sell customer data. We never have, we never will. Pretty much everybody else does. So keep that in mind. When you're worried, when people are worried about their personal information, that data doesn't go anywhere out of San Bruno when you use CityNet Services. My next general question, and if the city did not have CityNet Services, how much would it cost to make the connections and maintain the service? And I ask this because it seems like I haven't yet heard does the city pay CityNet Services for its services, or it's kind of like, oh yeah, we're just going to take it? So that's another question, and I'll take those answers now, Mayor, please, and then because my next round of questions are financing.
Sure. City manager.
So if does the city pay for CityNet Services, and what is that estimated cost if we didn't have CityNet Services?
Right. All right. So that's a two-part question. The first part is, does the city pay CityNet for its internet and telephone service? Right. In part, Director DeMartini can answer that question.
Yeah, so yes, so we do budget the internet cost for the departments that use internet, for example, as a line item in the expenditure budget for that department. And then there's a corresponding additional revenue amount in CityNet Services for the services they provide to the city departments, just like they're providing service to a household.
Right. However, we have not gone out and compared, oh, well, if we weren't paying CityNet, how much would AT&T or Comcast or Wave charge us? That could very be higher, right?
Right. So I think that's kind of important when we're looking at that we're running at a negative, that it's a cost that the general fund has. CityNet Services owes the general fund money, and well, it's because it's also that amount should be actually less, but I don't want to get lost in that. I was just curious because I haven't asked that question before. And so we do charge, but we don't know if it's a good rate or a bad rate.
Well, we know that we do not know if a private market competitor will pay us more. I'm sorry, will charge us more. We do know that we're getting an appropriate rate for the services we're paying for, because there's no markup on it and it's wholesale, right? but if we bought that from a private market competitor, what would that rate be? We just don't know because as a city, we've never contracted.
No, understood. I was just curious. Like the first part of the question, and I could look into that later because it is late. And the big question that we're dealing with is we talked about proceeding with the plan last year, and now we got some financing options. So for the options that were provided, have no interest at all in a UUT or whatever that's called. No new taxes. We need to give our residents a break. And that's that. For me, no use of Measure G funds. The majority of those funds need to go into repaving our streets. I know it could be an option, but that's my first reaction to it is no. It seems like the remaining options involve development impact fees. Okay, we can look at that. Debt issuance rates are really reasonable right now. Community benefits, that's an option. A blend of I don't know how many million from here or million from there or that bucket. But what I haven't heard yet is I'm interested in asking the San Bruno Community Foundation for a grant or a loan, because when we borrow from the San Bruno Community Foundation, we pay ourselves back. And I'm looking at the mission statement from San Bruno Community Foundation, and it says, the San Bruno Community Foundation serves the San Bruno community by investing in projects, programs, services, and facilities that have significant and lasting benefits. So if fiber doesn't fit that, who can say that it doesn't? I mean, it absolutely does. So get $3 million from San Bruno Community Foundation to kickstart this job because we need to move. We know that we have to invest in this, and blending the possibility blending the options that I've stated, I think is what I would like to suggest the council look into, and also look into the possibility of the sale of the cable building and relocating that building so that we could have a development there to assist with our housing and provide a better return on an asset that we have out there. So those are my thoughts. I also want to thank Keith, because I don't know, I'll probably forget later on, because it already is 11:23 and we have one more thing to get into. But Keith, I just want to let you know that I have been so impressed with your presentations and your wealth of knowledge, and it's wishing you the best, but I kind of wish you were here a little longer. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
I see we have somebody in the audience, so I want to get to them because obviously it is getting late. The only thing on Councilmember Medina that maybe on some comparison is the phones, because the city, we didn't always have the phones, right? So the city of San Bruno had to outsource the phones, and then phone service was offered through CityNet services. So that may be somewhere in the past you can compare something, but as an example. But there is a person from the audience, so why don't we, since they've hung out with us this late hour, why don't we bring them in, please?
Terry Chavez, just one moment.
Thank you, Melissa.
No problem.
Thank you for bringing me, because I'm using the Chromebook where I can't speak unless I'm a panelist. Thank you. I just wanted to briefly say, and thank you for letting me speak once again. I want to briefly say that, as most of you know, I actually work at PG&E, and the department I'm in, I prepare reports that show UUT rates for 71 towns and territories. And as you said, the percentages are roughly 4 to 5% on average. For example, San Jose is 5%, the city of Richmond is 10%. What I wanted to say was a little bit of details. Most cities have it for residential, commercial, and ag customers. Some cities have it only for commercial. And there's a whole slew of customers that can be exempt. Most seniors are exempt. Most care customers are exempt. I just wanted to mention that. So if the city council is interested in having, for example, UUT on PG&E electric billing statements, that's an option to think about. You can also select what type of customer between commercial, ag, and industrial, and residential. So if you didn't want to, because I know as you guys have already mentioned, it's hard to pass another tax on to the residents, because residents are feeling already taxed. But if you thought about just taxing commercial businesses, and then you could still exempt some nonprofits, because there's a lot of, I just want to say that there's a lot of flexibility with the UUT taxes. And so that's what I wanted to say. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'm going to bring it back. I just wanted to make sure. I've not seen anybody else in the audience at this time. So, you know, just for some of my comments as well is that I think we're all in kind of a concurrence about the tax, but however, Ms. Chavez brought up an element I hadn't thought about is, okay, we know the residents have been burdened and what have you. Do you do something commercial? So maybe there is an option, but I kind of have that same thing. So a lot of what has been said is already there as far as the debt services, using community benefits or a combination of things, but we kind of are at that point. It is a true crossroads that, you know, I think we need to realize too, if the answer is we're not prepared to invest in the enterprise, then we can't sustain it, right? Let's just be candid. And I know it's not a conversation anybody likes, and it's not one that you could ever think of with its history. But I think it's about, in order to stay in the game, you're going to have to play, and you're going to have to find a means in which to fund it. But I would like to see more of a multi-pronged approach, but I'm also with the no on the tax, with the caveat now that Ms. Chavez just brought up. Does staff have anything they want to add to the commentary or thoughts from council that you've heard so far?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, if I can. So if we step up on the balcony a little bit, tonight was talking about the fiber to the home project and providing council with financing options. As we've talked about a year ago, we're at a crossroads as an enterprise. If we do not invest in our infrastructure, our customer base will slowly erode away, and our ability to continue to deliver services will erode. That's not going to happen overnight, and what's on the council's agenda tonight is not sort of investing into the fiber to the home project or starting the process to think about winding down the enterprise. That's not before you tonight. What's before you tonight is a lot of information about the paths forward to start to fund the fiber to the home project. What I've heard from council tonight is a few things. One, a reluctance to look into additional taxes. Two, understanding why Measure G was put forward, but a reluctance to use Measure G for that, given the purpose of Measure G that has largely been talked about, which is roads and infrastructure. We just started to receive those funds, and due to COVID, have not made a major investment in our roads and our infrastructure. Three, what was also talked about is raising fees potentially up to 5% on the enterprise might be viable as long as it did not erode our customer base. And what's interesting about that, and I'll just highlight one of the final slides of the finance director's presentation, is that a 5% increase raises $541,000, and 10-year debt service or 30-year debt service for the project costs about $600,000 a year. Not that far off. And it makes a lot of sense to charge the users of the system for the infrastructure to improve the system. But we're not asking for that decision right now. We're just presenting options. There were other conversations about potentially using community benefits. There appeared to be a willingness to consider that, albeit mindful of the fact that San Bruno has a lot of needs, and we were projecting those community benefits to go to a lot of other needs, and that money is likely not going to be in the city's coffers for 1 to 2 years. And so we probably don't have that time to postpone on this decision. And so what I'm hearing from council is sort of, one, the desire for more information. Councilmember Salazar mentioned investment in the fiber to the home. If we, let's say, invest $12 million or half of that, is that a wasted investment if we decide to get out of the business? The answer to that is no, because fiber is the gold standard pipe for telecommunications. And if we sell the business, that is a value to whoever buys it. However, what we don't know is, will the person that buys the enterprise, if we go there, already have their fiber in the ground, and so then it may not be as valuable to them. And so the answer to that question would take substantial research and probably modeling and maybe even an RFP process, right? The other question was about being over-leveraged on debt, or not, I'm sorry, not over-leveraged on debt, using up some of our debt capacity, thus not having debt capacity for other things. We can bring back to you more information on that, because in the slide that was shown, it was true general fund money and what we think of as our general fund, but it didn't include the Measure G money. And I say that not to say that we would use Measure G money for debt elsewhere, but it's important to note that that debt capacity portrait did not take away the or preclude using a portion of Measure G for debt for road maintenance. That would not count towards that statistic that went up to 6.1% of the city's general fund expenditures. And I know that slide is up, so it may be hard for you to follow me, so we can come back with more information on that. But the key point there is we would still have capacity to use Measure G money to bond to do more road work today, which is something council has talked about. And if we took on debt for the fiber to the home, the two are not linked. And we can provide more information. I sort of see some head nods and some stares, but we can provide more information on that. And so what I think we are almost at is a pause point in the night where staff needs to go back, provide some answers to the questions that have been asked, and then hold another study session to have this conversation. But we do need a cadence to make a decision on this. It doesn't have to be today, it doesn't have to be next month. But what we know is that the infrastructure or the enterprise needs investment. And our infrastructure is old, it's failing, it's not duct tape and shoestring yet, but if we keep it up, it won't be far away. And I think we're all in agreement on if we stay in the business, what path to go down. And that path is fiber to the home. It aligns to where the market is. We have good results for the investments that we've already made. The MDUs have already paid for their self and providing over $800,000 in net new revenue a year to the enterprise. And so we know we have the right plan. I would also say that part of the reason why we're having this conversation is that we're a municipal entity. If this business was owned by a private market competitor, they would use their pocketbook or take out a loan to invest in the infrastructure because you have to make investments in utilities. It's the same issue with PG&E. You have to invest in these utilities. Our challenge is we're faced with the fact of if we invest in here, what else are we not doing elsewhere in the community, right? And so the enterprise needs to get to a point, and it has made amazing progress to get to a point to reduce that annual deficit from 1.2 million just 2.5 years ago to 200,000 last year and projected to be zero this year. Amazing progress. And so we're on the path back to profitability, and we know we have the right business model. The question that's before council, not tonight, is do we make that investment that we all know is needed to continue operating the enterprise? Or do we say, you know what, at some point, this is not the business that we're gonna be in. And that conversation is a whole host of other questions and analysis. And that is not a clear path either. And it's fraught with a lot of questions that of course involves staff and transition. But where we are tonight, it seems like council has asked a number of questions and staff needs to come back with additional information. And in particular, do some analysis around the 5% increase in fees, what that may do to our comparability in the market for services, and if we could potentially do that and be able to hold on to our customers and take out debt and cover that debt service, as well as some of the other questions that have been asked.
I think you summarized that well. So I think council concurs, or they're tired, but I think they're concurring. But also to touch on what city manager said, Sandeep, thank you for and Mr. DiMartini, thank you for the presentation and the detail and the depth that you went into. And also, Sandeep, honestly, you know, when you talk about, and city manager already said it, the 1.2, 2.5 years ago to a zero, that's significant. That's not growing a debt. That is, you know, you've made, and I know it's a lot of hard work that we don't see and we don't know, renegotiating contracts, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to thank you for that. So with that, city manager, I think you've summarized well for us, and we're going to go ahead and move on to comments from council members, if that's okay.